87% of Americans now say the nation is experiencing a crisis because of how unaffordable life has become. Not a problem, not a challenge, a crisis. That number comes from a national survey of 5,000 Americans conducted state by state at the end of 2025. And what makes it different from every other poll you have seen about the economy is the word those respondents chose. They did not say things are tough. They did not say it is getting harder. They said crisis. And when 87% of a country uses the word crisis to describe their daily financial reality, you are not looking at an economic downturn. You are looking at a population that is reaching the edge of what it can absorb. A Talker Research survey of 2,000 Americans conducted in early March 2026 found that the number one word Americans used to describe their year so far was stressful. 35% said stressful. 32% said challenging. 1 in 3 Americans, 32%, said they are currently experiencing an existential crisis. Not stress, not worry, an existential crisis. The kind of psychological state where a person questions whether the life they are living is sustainable, whether the future they are working toward is reachable, and whether the systems they were told would protect them actually function. And the number one driver of that existential crisis among baby boomers, the generation most likely to be watching this video right now, was financial stress. 48% of boomers in that survey said financial stress was the primary reason they feel like they are falling apart. Not politics, not health, not relationships, money, the inability to afford the life they are currently living. And what is coming this summer will make everything they have endured so far feel like a warm-up. Half of American workers cannot sleep and 83% are drowning in workplace stress that nobody is addressing. Mindshare Partners published workplace mental health data for 2025 that reads like a clinical diagnosis of a country that has been running on fumes for 6 years. 76% of U.S. workers reported experiencing some level of burnout. 53% reported moderate to severe burnout, depression, or anxiety. Not mild, moderate to severe. More than half of the American workforce is operating in a psychological state that clinicians would classify as requiring intervention. And the American Institute of Stress estimated that 83% of U.S. workers experience work-related stress, with approximately half saying they need help learning how to manage it. 1 in 4 American employees works outside their scheduled hours most of the time or every day. And 63% work outside scheduled hours at least sometimes. The boundary between work and life has not blurred, it has dissolved. And the consequences are measurable. Gallup documented that burnout-related productivity losses drained $438 billion globally in 2024. In the United States alone, the economic cost of diminished worker output from stress, burnout, absenteeism, and presenteeism exceeds $300 billion annually according to the American Institute of Stress. Younger workers are being destroyed by it. 68% of Gen Z and younger millennials report frequent burnout compared to 40% of boomers. But boomers are not escaping, they are simply expressing their burnout differently. They are not quittings. They are job huggings, which is the term Allianz used in their 2026 survey to describe workers who cling to unfulfilling jobs because the economic uncertainty is too terrifying to risk a change. 71% of workers who are not looking for a new job said it was because it seems safer to stay where they are in the current environment. They are not satisfied, they are trapped. And trapped people do not perform well, do not think clearly, do not make good financial decisions, and do not handle additional stress with resilience. They snap. And this summer is about to pile more stress on top of a workforce that is already at structural capacity for what it can absorb. And the financial component of workplace stress is not separate from the psychological component. It is the same thing. The APA's research documented that financial stress does more than make people feel uneasy. It directly affects physical health. People under long-term financial pressure delay doctor's appointments, skip preventive care, and cut back on medications to save money. That creates what clinicians call a vicious cycle where stress worsens health and poor health increases financial strain. A 2022 study published in JAMA Psychiatry found that individuals experiencing high stress over a prolonged period were 2 times more likely to develop metabolic syndrome. A cluster of conditions including high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and excess abdominal fat that increases cardiovascular risk. The American worker in 2026 is not just burned out. They are physically deteriorating because the financial stress they carry is converting directly into cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, immune suppression, and chronic sleep deprivation. 27% of workers whose companies experienced layoffs reported worsening mental health. And 13% said that worrying about how AI will impact their role is driving their burnout. The threats are coming from every direction simultaneously, from the cost of living, from the job market, from technology, from the healthcare system that is supposed to treat the damage, but is itself becoming unaffordable. And summer is when the heat compounds every one of these stressors because heat itself is a physiological stressor that reduces cognitive function, increases irritability, and shortens the fuse on every emotional trigger that the preceding months have been loading. Anxiety and depression climbed 10% in a single year while access to care actually declined. A comprehensive mental health report published 2 days ago documented that anxiety rose 9.3% and depression rose 10.6% between 2025 and 2026. Stress and burnout increased 3.8%. Trauma-related conditions increased 7.1%. In a single year, every major category of mental health distress is climbing at rates that would constitute an epidemic if they were applied to any physical disease. And here is the number that should make every policymaker in Washington stop what they are doing. While mental health conditions are surging, access to mental health services has actually declined. 52.6% of American adults have never accessed services like talk therapy or psychiatry. And reported access dropped from 50% in 2025 to 47.4% in 2026. The need is growing, the supply is shrinking, and the primary reason is cost. In 2025, 25% of respondents cited cost as the leading barrier to seeking mental health care. In 2026, that number jumped to 41%, a 16 percentage point increase in a single year. The cost barrier to mental health care nearly doubled in 12 months. And 34% of Americans now report high financial stress, worrying about their finances daily or weekly. Half of all survey respondents reduce spending on therapy, gym memberships, or personal health due to rising costs. 54% feel exhausted from constantly trying to make their finances stretch. The people who need mental health care the most are the people who can least afford it. And the ACA premium subsidies that made therapy accessible through marketplace plans expired on January 1, 2026. Which means the 22 million Americans who relied on those subsidies for affordable health insurance, including mental health coverage, are now paying dramatically higher premiums or going without coverage entirely. The mental health safety net is being cut at the exact moment the mental health crisis is accelerating. And the summer of 2026, with its convergence of energy costs, food costs, heat, war anxiety, political volatility, and financial compression, is going to push the demand for mental health care to levels that the system cannot remotely accommodate. 42% of Americans entered 2026 anxious about their own mental health, and that was before the war started. Finding Solutions Counseling Centers reported that approximately 42% of Americans entered 2026 reporting anxiety about their mental health. Not anxiety about the economy, not anxiety about politics. Anxiety about their own psychological state. They are worried about their own minds. And that data was collected before the Iran war began on February 28th. Before gasoline went from $3 to $4.15. Before the CPI printed a 0.9% monthly increase. Before the Strait of Hormuz was blocked and 230 tankers were trapped, and the IEA called it the greatest energy security challenge in history. Before the ceasefire collapsed, before the IMF warned of global recession. Before consumer sentiment fell to the lowest reading in 75 years of survey data. All of those events happened after the 42% figure was recorded. Which means the actual percentage of Americans who are anxious about their mental health right now, in mid-April 2026, is almost certainly higher than 42%. And the APA's Stress in America report from November 2025 documented that 76% of adults said the future of the nation is a significant source of stress. That figure has been steady since before the 2024 election, which tells you that the stress is not partisan. It is structural. It does not change when the administration changes because the underlying conditions that produce it. Affordability, healthcare costs, job insecurity, political division are present regardless of who holds office. And among younger adults and parents, the psychological damage is even more acute. Nearly two-thirds of Americans aged 18 to 34 and more than half of parents said they have considered relocating to another country due to the state of the nation. They are not daydreaming about a vacation, they are contemplating leaving. And 69% of adults said they could have used more emotional support over the past year than they received, up from 65% in 2024. The gap between what Americans need psychologically and what they are receiving is widening every year. And the summer of 2026 is going to stretch that gap to its widest point because the stressors are compounding while the resources are contracting. And let me put the generational breakdown in front of you because it reveals something about the specific nature of the crisis that is coming this summer. Among Gen X, the generation aged roughly 44 to 60, the top two drivers of existential crisis were tied at 46% each. Lack of control over their problems and financial stress. Gen X is the generation that is simultaneously supporting aging parents and launching adult children. They are the sandwich generation, and the squeeze is financial, emotional, and physical all at once. Their retirement savings are insufficient because the 2008 crash wiped out their early accumulation, and the 2022 bear market eroded their peak earning recovery. Their children's college costs have surged, their parents' healthcare needs are escalating, and their own health is beginning to require the kind of consistent medical attention that costs money they do not have because the insurance premiums consumed it. Among baby boomers, 48% cited financial stress as the primary driver of their existential crisis. Nearly half. These are people who were told their entire working lives that if they saved, if they paid into Social Security, if they contributed to their 401k, if they paid off their mortgage, they would be fine. And they are not fines. The promises that structured their financial planning for 40 years have been systematically weakened. And the cost of living has been systematically raised. And the gap between what they were promised and what they are experiencing is the gap that produces the existential crisis that 48% of them are now reporting. When a 67-year-old retiree who did everything right tells a survey that they are experiencing an existential crisis driven by financial stress, that is not a mental health statistic. That is an indictment of every institution that made them a promise and failed to keep it. 52% cannot pay their bills on time, and summer is when every bill gets worse simultaneously. More than half of Americans, 52%, found it difficult to pay their bills on time each month at the end of 2025. 50% struggled to afford basic groceries. And the Allianz 2026 survey found that 48% of Americans are more stressed entering 2026 than they were at the start of 2025, up from 43% a year earlier. The trajectory is climbing. Every year, more Americans are more stressed than the year before. And summer is the season that breaks household budgets because every major expense category rises simultaneously. Electricity bills surge as air conditioning becomes a survival necessity across the Sun Belt and increasingly across the Midwest and Northeast as heat waves intensify. The average residential electricity bill in the United States has already risen faster than wages according to Bloomberg and the Urban Institute, with customers paying approximately $40 more per month in December 2025 than in December 2017. A summer heat wave in 2026 will push those bills higher still. Gasoline prices, which are already above $4 per gallon because of the Iran war and the Strait of Hormuz closure, traditionally peak in the summer driving season as demand rises. If the strait remains blocked or partially blocked, if the ceasefire remains collapsed, if the naval confrontation escalates, gasoline could reach $5 or $6 per gallon during the exact months when American families are driving to work, driving children to summer programs, and trying to take the one vacation they planned all year. And groceries, which are already 36% more expensive than they were in 2014, will absorb the second and third-order effects of the March energy shock in June and July. Food prices will climb further during the exact months when school lunch programs stop feeding children and families are responsible for every meal. The National School Lunch Program feeds approximately 30 million children during the academic year. When school ends in June, those meals stop. And the families who depended on those meals to stretch their grocery budget through the school year are suddenly absorbing the full cost of feeding their children 3 meals a day. 7 days a week at prices that are rising because of a war 7,0 miles away. Summer is the season when the electric bill arrives the same week, as the gas bill arrives the same week, as the grocery bill arrives the same week as the camp or childcare bill arrives, and there is no paycheck large enough to cover all four at once. That is the compression that breaks people, not a single catastrophic event. The relentless, grinding, weekly arrival of bills that are all larger than the income that is supposed to pay them. And 52% of Americans could not keep up with their bills before the war started. Before the energy shock, before the inflation surge, before the ceasefire collapsed. 52% were already drowning. Summer is what happens when drowning people get pushed underwater. And the compounding effect of summer heat on household budgets is not linear. It is exponential. The Department of Health and Human Services has documented that extreme heat events are increasing in frequency, duration, and intensity across the United States. The summer of 2023 was the hottest summer in recorded history. The summer of 2024 matched it. And NOAA projections for 2026 suggest above-average temperatures across the majority of the continental United States from June through August. In Phoenix, summer electricity bills routinely exceed $400 per month because air conditioning is not a comfort. It is medical necessity. In Houston, in Dallas, in Atlanta, in Miami, in Las Vegas, the same dynamic applies. And the states with the highest summer cooling costs are disproportionately the states with the highest poverty rates, the highest rates of uninsurance, and the highest rates of food insecurity. The geography of heat maps directly onto the geography of financial fragility. The people who need air conditioning the most to survive are the people who can least afford the electricity bill that air conditioning generates. And when they cannot afford it, they turn off the AC. And when they turn off the AC during a heat wave, the emergency rooms fill with heat stroke, heat exhaustion, and dehydration cases that generate medical bills that add to the financial stress that caused them to turn off the AC in the first place. That is not a metaphor. That is the documented cycle that plays out in every American summer in the Sun Belt. And in the summer of 2026. With electricity prices already running well ahead of inflation. With the Iran war adding energy cost pressure on top of existing price increases. And with household budgets already at the breaking point. The cycle will be more severe than in any previous year. Credit card debt hit $1.21 trillion and delinquencies, RAT levels not seen since the financial crisis and summer will break the dam. Americans are carrying $1.21 trillion in credit card debt at an average interest rate of 22.76%. That is the highest balance and the highest rate in the history of consumer credit in the United States. And the delinquency rate on credit cards has climbed to the highest level in almost a decade, according to Bloomberg. Auto repossessions are at the highest level since the 2008 financial crisis, according to Cox Automotive. Student loan delinquencies are rising at record pace after the resumption of payments. McKinsey documented in Q4 2025 that 29% of adults dipped into savings. 29% reduced their savings rate, and 28% increased credit card usage. A growing number of Americans are using buy now, pay later plans to finance weekly groceries. Not cars, not furniture, groceries. The American consumer is not just leveraged. The American consumer is financially naked, with no savings buffer, no credit capacity, and no safety margin between their income and their obligations. And summer is the season when that nakedness becomes visible. Summer vacations that were planned in January are now unaffordable but non-refundable. Summer camps that were booked and paid for in March are now competing with a grocery budget that has been repriced by war. Summer utility bills arrive at double or triple the spring rate in states where air conditioning is not optional but survival. And the back-to-school spending that begins in late July, which the National Retail Federation typically estimates at over $40 billion nationally, will collide with households that have been financially bled dry by 3 months of simultaneous cost increases. The American household that entered 2026 with $1 $0 in emergency savings, which is approximately the median, will exit the summer with that savings depleted and their credit cards at their limits. And when the savings are gone and the credit is maxed and the bills keep arriving, the options narrow to three. Default, deprivation, or desperation. Default means missed payments, collections, damaged credit, and the spiral that follows. Deprivation means skipping meals, skipping medicine, skipping the doctor. Letting the car insurance lapse, turning off the air conditioning during a heat wave. Desperation means payday loans at 400% APR, title loans on the family car, cash advances on maxed credit cards at penalty rates, and the financial decisions that turn a bad situation into an unrecoverable one. Every one of those outcomes is already happening at scale in America in April 2026. Summer will multiply them. Loneliness is killing people and nobody is connecting IT to what the economy has done to American communities. The APA's Stress in America report documented something that goes beyond economics and into the territory of social collapse. Adults who reported high levels of loneliness were significantly more likely to be experiencing chronic health issues, especially depression, anxiety disorders, and chronic pain. 80% of adults with high loneliness said they live with a chronic illness, compared to 66% with moderate loneliness and an even lower percentage with low loneliness. 70% of highly lonely adults said it was hard to plan for the future compared to 26% of those with low loneliness. 75% of highly lonely adults reported difficulty making decisions. Loneliness is not a lifestyle complaint. It is a health condition with measurable physiological consequences that the Surgeon General has declared a national epidemic. And the economic crisis is making it worse because the behaviors that combat loneliness. Going out to eat with friends, joining a gym, attending community events, visiting family in other cities all cost money. And the money is gone. The financial compression that is squeezing American households is also squeezing the social connections that keep people psychologically intact. When a 62-year-old retiree on a fixed income cannot afford to drive to see their grandchildren because gasoline is $4.15 a gallon and will be $5 by July, they are not just missing a visit. They are losing a connection that was keeping them alive. When a single mother cancels the gym membership because the premium increase on her health insurance consumed the budget line that paid for it, she is not just losing exercise. She is losing the only hour of her week where she interacted with other adults who were not her employer or her children's teachers. When a laid-off 55-year-old stops attending the job networking group because the shame of prolonged unemployment has become unbearable and the cost of driving across town is no longer justifiable, they are not just giving up on a job search. They are retreating into isolation. And isolation, in the clinical literature, carries a mortality risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. The economy is not just making Americans poorer, it is making them lonelier. And lonelier people are sicker, sadder, more anxious, more impulsive, and more fragile in the face of additional stress. Summer, with its relentless heat, its rising costs, its political volatility, and its war-driven uncertainty, is going to land on a population that is financially drained, psychologically exhausted, socially isolated, and clinically undertreated. And that population is going to respond the way every population in history has responded when pushed past its capacity to absorb. Some will withdraw into silence. Some will lash out in ways that are visible and measurable, in road rage incidents, in retail confrontations, in domestic conflicts, in emergency room admissions for anxiety and panic attacks, in calls to crisis hotlines that are already operating at record volume. And some will simply stop functioning, stop opening the mail, stop answering the phone, stop going to the doctor, stop making plans, stop believing that the effort they are putting into survival is connected to any outcome that resembles a life worth living. That is what snapping looks like at the population level. It is not an explosion. It is a mass withdrawal of participation by people who have concluded that the system they were told would reward their effort has instead consumed it. And this summer, the evidence of that withdrawal will become visible in every data set that measures the health, the spending, the engagement, and the well-being of the American public. Share this video with every American you know who is struggling. Not for the algorithms, Because the most dangerous thing about a breaking point is believing you are the only one who has reached it. You are not. 87% of the country is standing right where you are. And knowing that is the first step toward not breaking alone. Because the most corrosive element of this crisis is the isolation. The belief that you are the only one who cannot keep up. The shame of being unable to afford what you could afford 3 years ago. The silence around kitchen tables where both adults know the math does not work, but neither one says it out loud because saying it makes it real. 87% of this country is sitting at that table. 87% is experiencing the same crisis, and this summer will prove it. Not through a single dramatic event. Through 100 million household budgets that all fail in the same month. For the same reasons, under the same pressures, in the same silence.